Have you ever had to play peacekeeper in your household?
My family has always been the kind of people who measured love in trophies and applause. You were either someone to be proud of or someone to be politely ignored. There was no middle ground. And growing up in that kind of household, you learn early on that showing up isn't enough. You have to impress. You have to dazzle. You have to win. So when I opened my email that morning, casually scrolling through my inbox over a cup of stale hotel room coffee, and realized there was no invitation, no forwarded note, not even a passive-aggressive comment from my mother about family updates, I already knew what it meant before I had to ask. I wasn't invited. Again. The reunion was my mom's idea. Of course it was. She has always loved the performance of family, coordinated matching outfits, buffet tables organized by dietary restriction, and enough photo booths to look like a low-budget prom. My parents go big on appearances, especially when it's a chance to show off. They'd been planning it for months, messaging cousins in 3 different time zones, coordinating flights, booking cottages on some lake in upstate New York like we were the Kennedys, only less charismatic and far more judgmental. I found out about it the same way I found out my brother got married the first time, by accident. My cousin Lisa, who either didn't realize or didn't care that I wasn't included, posted a series of photos on Instagram that made it look like a Hallmark special. Everyone was there. Everyone smiling, wine glasses in hand, the fire pit glowing in the background. My dad was front and center in most of them, beaming in that way he never did around me, and there, beneath one group shot with the caption, "So proud of this amazing, accomplished family," was a sentence that would stick in my throat like gravel. Reunion for the achievers. What a blessing to be surrounded by excellence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at my screen for a few long minutes while that old, familiar tightness built in my chest, the one that used to show up every time my dad introduced Jeff at family dinners as our lawyer, and me as Sarah, who's still figuring things out. I was 38, co-founder of a tech startup, and working 18-hour days to get our platform off the ground, but in their eyes, I was still the kid who quit grad school, the girl who wore sneakers to Christmas dinner, the one who never quite fit into the mold they'd carved out for their ideal daughter. When I finally called my mom, because yes, I still had that tiny voice in the back of my head that said, maybe this was a mistake, maybe they forgot, maybe the email really had bounced. She answered on the 3rd ring with that syrupy tone she used for customer service reps and social climbers. "Oh, hi honey," she said, like she hadn't just orchestrated my exclusion from the one event designed to honor the people she actually valued. I didn't bother with small talk. I asked her directly. I asked why I wasn't invited. And her answer, without hesitation, without even a breath of apology, was this: "Well, Sarah, we just thought it would be more encouraging to focus on the ones who've really accomplished something. You know, to inspire the younger kids." I remember sitting down slowly, like the weight of that sentence had taken my legs out. She said it so casually, like it was a reasonable decision. Like success, as defined by them, was a prerequisite for being acknowledged. I didn't yell. I didn't give her the satisfaction of hearing my voice crack. I just said, "Okay," and hung up. Then I opened a bottle of wine I had no business drinking on an empty stomach and scrolled through every photo from that reunion like it was some twisted slideshow of everything I never was. The hugs I wasn't part of. The toasts I didn't hear. The people I'd known since childhood looking straight into the camera like they'd forgotten I existed. My older brother, Jeff, was in nearly every shot. Polished as ever in a linen button-down, hand on his wife's waist like a catalog ad for generational wealth. He's always known how to perform for our parents. He followed the path exactly as they laid it out: law school, firm partnership, a suburban home with a finished basement, and 2 kids who take violin lessons. He never rocked the boat. Never took risks. Never tried to build something out of nothing. And they adored him for it. Meanwhile, I was the girl who burned her safety net for a startup idea, lived out of a friend's guest room for 2 years, and racked up debt so deep I thought I'd never breathe again. But I believed in what we were building. I still do. Even when no one else did. Especially them. Back then, I told myself I didn't care what they thought. That success would be its own vindication. That the day would come when they'd see my name in lights and realize they'd underestimated me. But standing there in that hotel room, watching my father clink glasses with my cousins while I sat alone with room temperature Chardonnay, I realized something brutal. Sometimes they don't see. Sometimes they choose not to. And no amount of success can make a person open their eyes if they don't want to. And that's when it happened. Right as I was debating whether or not to delete Instagram altogether, a news alert popped up on my phone. Bloomberg. Front page. My co-founder's face, grinning like he just won the Super Bowl. Our company, my company, had just closed its IPO, valued at over $800 million. My name was second line right under his. Co-founder. CFO. Visionary, they called me. I let out a short, stunned laugh, equal parts disbelief and bitterness. There it was. The moment I'd dreamed of for years. Validation, etched into the internet by one of the biggest business outlets in the world. And I was sitting on a scratchy armchair with wine-stained teeth and parents who didn't think I was worth a damn. I didn't post it. I didn't share the article. I didn't send a smug message or forward it to the family group chat that I hadn't been part of in over a year. I just sat there in the quiet, staring at my name, wondering why it didn't feel like a win. Wondering why, even now, I still wanted to call my dad. To hear him say, "I saw the article. I'm proud of you." But that call didn't come. Not that night. Not that week. It came the next morning. One missed call. No message. Just dad. And that, somehow, was worse than silence. There's a very specific kind of silence that settles in when your own parents stop believing in you, not out of anger, not because you've done something unforgivable, but simply because you no longer fit the version of success they've chosen to worship. And for me, that silence began years before that missed reunion, before the IPO, before Bloomberg ever bothered to learn how to pronounce my name. It started the day I told them I wasn't going to finish grad school, that I was leaving with a half-written thesis and a backpack full of code, because I had an idea, something big, something that felt like it could actually change something. And I didn't want to waste another 2 years learning theories about systems I was already trying to tear down. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd be curious or proud that I was taking a risk, stepping into something raw and unproven, but instead my dad looked at me like I'd just told him I was moving to Mars, and my mother, without missing a beat, asked if I could still get a refund on my tuition. I remember standing in their kitchen, this cold, sterile place with granite countertops that had never seen real joy, and watching them process the fact that I wasn't going to be the kind of daughter they could brag about at golf club dinners or neighborhood parties. My mom said something like, "You can't just jump into things because they're trendy, Sarah. You're not some teenager with a YouTube channel." My dad didn't even speak for a minute, just sighed and went back to his newspaper, and when he finally opened his mouth, it was only to say, "Don't come to us when it falls apart." That was it. No curiosity. No questions. No, what's the idea, or how can we help? Just cold detachment, like they were filing me away under disappointment before I'd even had a chance to try. But I went ahead with it anyway. I packed up what little I had, moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment with my co-founders, Maya, the engineer who could build anything if you gave her a pot of coffee and a deadline, and Lucas, the marketing savant who could sell ice to a snowman. And we started building. Days turned into nights, and nights into that kind of blur where you forget what day of the week it is, where your meals are protein bars and vending machine chips, and where the only thing keeping you from collapse is the thin thread of belief that maybe this stupid idea is worth something. We were building a platform that aimed to revolutionize peer-to-peer lending for underserved small businesses, a space full of red tape and corporate greed, and we were doing it with almost no funding and absolutely no backup plan. During that time, I'd call my parents maybe once every few weeks, trying to maintain some thread of connection even as I knew they were quietly waiting for me to fail. The conversations were always short and clipped, full of polite disinterest. My mom would ask about my little project, and my dad would remind me that the economy was unstable, as if I hadn't noticed. Meanwhile, Jeff had just made partner at his firm and bought a house with more bathrooms than people, and the family group chat was lit up with photos of his kids, his yard, his wife's new Audi. My updates, if I gave them, were met with uncomfortable silence or a change of subject. Eventually, I stopped sharing altogether. It was easier that way. But the truth is, even with all that distance and coldness, there was a small, stubborn part of me that still wanted to prove something, not just to them, but to myself. I wanted to prove that I could do something that mattered, even if it didn't look like success to the people who thought a clean resume and a country club membership were the ultimate benchmarks of a life well lived. I worked through migraines, through panic attacks, through moments where I thought I'd have to give up and go back home with my tail between my legs, and every time I got close to breaking, I'd remember my dad's voice, calm and dismissive. Don't come to us when it falls apart. What he didn't know, what they all didn't know, was that there were nights I slept under my desk in that tiny office we sublet from a failing real estate agency. Nights I cried in the shower so Maya wouldn't hear me through the thin drywall. Nights I rehearsed investor pitches until my voice cracked and my hands trembled. There were months we didn't pay ourselves, months when the only thing keeping us from shutting it all down was the loyalty we had to each other and the anger that drove us to keep going just to prove everyone wrong. I wasn't just trying things. I was betting everything on an idea that nobody wanted to touch, and still, they couldn't see it. And then, one afternoon in early spring, something shifted. We landed a meeting with a mid-tier VC firm, and by some miracle, they saw what we were building, not just the product, but the potential. They invested. Not a lot, but enough to get us out of ramen and air mattress mode. We hired 2 interns. We moved into an actual office with windows. We started getting attention, first from local blogs, then industry newsletters, and then, one afternoon, Wired did a feature on 5 fintech startups to watch, and we were number 2. I sent the link to my parents. My mom never responded. My dad wrote back, interesting. Hope it pans out. Pans out. Like we were frying eggs, not rewriting access to capital for small businesses across the country. The truth is, I kept hoping, idiotically, obsessively, that something would finally be impressive enough to crack through their indifference, that they'd call out of the blue and say, "We're proud of you," not because I begged for it, not because I earned it through some grand achievement, but because they loved me, because I was enough. But that call never came. Not after the Wired article. Not after our user base hit 50,000. Not after we made the Inc. Top Founders Under 40 list. I was still invisible. Still the one who left. Still the one who didn't make them look good at cocktail parties. And so, when I saw my name on Bloomberg that night, beneath a bold headline about our IPO, next to numbers that didn't even feel real yet, 800 million, 300,000 active users, a partnership with a major bank, I didn't celebrate. I didn't open champagne or call everyone I knew. I just stared at the screen and thought, will this be enough? The next morning, my phone rang once. 1 missed call. No message. Just Dad. A silence thicker than before, because now it wasn't just absence. It was recognition. Late, hesitant, and somehow worse than if he'd kept ignoring me entirely. And I couldn't help but wonder, as I stared at that missed call notification for the 3rd time in 5 minutes, whether he was calling because he finally saw me, or because now, finally, everyone else did. It's a strange thing, that moment when the thing you've been chasing finally arrives, not in a blaze of fireworks or some triumphant standing ovation, but in silence, in the glow of a laptop screen at 3 in the morning, surrounded by empty coffee cups, spreadsheets, and the dull ache behind your eyes from staring at code and contracts for so long that you forget what it feels like to be a person instead of a machine. When the Bloomberg article went live, I was the last to know. Lucas had called twice, left a voicemail shouting something half-coherent about being official, and when I finally called him back, my voice barely working, he just said, "Check the homepage," and then hung up. There it was, our name, our company, our faces, blown up in high resolution with the kind of headline you read 5 times just to make sure your brain isn't playing tricks on you. It was clean, sharp, unapologetic, disruptors no more. This fintech trio just took their vision public. Below it, a glossy photo of the 3 of us, taken just a week before in a studio that smelled like burning lights and hair gel. I looked confident in it, successful, like someone who knew exactly what she was doing, but in reality, I'd barely slept, had almost fainted during the shoot from hunger and stress, and spent the entire ride home wondering if we were making the biggest mistake of our lives by going public in a volatile market. But none of that mattered now. It was done. We'd crossed over. From dreamers to founders. From stubborn idealists to people who made things happen. The IPO had launched hours earlier while I was still buried in paperwork, too wired to feel anything except dread, and by the time the markets closed, we had secured an opening valuation of over $800 million real money. Real recognition, the kind of success that couldn't be ignored even by people who made ignoring me their full-time hobby. I stared at the screen, numb, the article open in 5 different tabs as if one of them might say something different, something more personal, something that felt like closure. It didn't. I texted Maya. She sent back 3 heart emojis and a photo of her dog in a party hat. Lucas replied with a link to a yacht rental site and the phrase, "too soon." I should have felt proud. I should have felt relief. I should have done what most people do in that moment, called someone who mattered, poured a drink, sat back and let it soak in, but all I did was sit there in the dark, listening to the hum of my radiator, wondering why the first thing I felt wasn't joy, but exhaustion. I kept refreshing my phone. Not for congratulations from strangers or investors. I had already received over 50 LinkedIn notifications and 3 PR requests, but for that one call I had been waiting on for almost a decade. That simple. Human acknowledgement from the people who made me, who raised me, who told me in no uncertain terms that they didn't believe in me. I wanted to see Mom or Dad pop up on my lock screen. I wanted a text, a call, anything that said, "We saw it. You did it." But there was nothing. Not that night. I showered. I lay in bed. I stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine what they might say if they called, how I would respond, whether I would even pick up, whether I could do it without crying or yelling or falling apart. I wondered if they'd even read the article, if someone had sent it to them, if they had ignored it the way they'd ignored everything else I'd ever done that didn't fit into their vision of a proper, presentable life. And then, just as I was starting to drift into that half-sleep where your mind won't stop looping through hypothetical conversations, my phone lit up on the nightstand. 1 ring. Then silence. A missed call. From Dad. No voicemail. No follow-up text. Just a single ring, like he'd changed his mind halfway through, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to reach out, like he was testing the waters or hoping I wouldn't answer. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't expected, rage. Not hot, wild rage, but the cold, dense kind that sits in your gut like cement. Because after everything, after the years of silence, the snide remarks, the family dinners where I was invisible, the reunion I wasn't invited to because it's only for the achievers, after all of that, now he wanted to call? Now that I was worth something? Now that strangers were saying my name with admiration? I stared at the missed call for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen, and in that stillness, I thought about the last time he'd reached out before this. 6 months earlier. I had just posted a short video for a digital conference, explaining our mission, why we'd built our platform, who it was for, and why it mattered. It went semi-viral in our industry. It got picked up by a financial blog. I sent it to my dad, not out of desperation, but because I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd be able to hear me in it. Not the pitch, not the branding, but me. The daughter who never stopped trying to be seen. The daughter who was doing something real. He never replied. But the next day, I found an old voicemail I'd never listened to, probably left around the time they were planning the reunion. I hit play and his voice, calm and almost disinterested, came through. "We just don't want to be embarrassed, Sarah. You understand, right? It's not personal. It's just, people talk." That was it. That was the whole message. No context. No warmth. Just the brutal honesty of someone who sees his child as a liability, a risk to his reputation, a deviation from the clean family image he's spent a lifetime curating. So now, after months of silence, after decades of being the disappointment, he calls with no words, no message, no apology, just a single missed call that felt more like a warning shot than an olive branch. I didn't call back. I didn't answer. I didn't send the article. I just lay there in bed, staring at the screen, feeling the full weight of what it meant to succeed in spite of someone, rather than because of them. And even though I'd always fantasized about this moment, about showing them I'd made it, rubbing it in their smug, dismissive faces, now that it was here, it felt hollow. Because the truth is, I didn't want revenge. I wanted love. And when you grow up never getting that, it doesn't matter how much money you raise or how many headlines you earn, there's always a part of you still waiting at the table, hoping they'll finally look up and say, "We see you." But they never do. And maybe they never will. There's something uniquely sharp about a delayed apology, like a knife twisted not into your back, but somewhere deeper, more intimate, a part of you that has spent years hardening, rehearsing indifference, building armor around old wounds you swore you wouldn't let define you. And yet, one silent missed call, one unanswered voicemail, or one look across a crowded room can slip through all of it in seconds. When my father called and hung up after the Bloomberg feature, it wasn't the absence of words that stung, it was the timing, the implication that only now, with numbers behind my name and strangers chanting our company's valuation like a victory anthem, was I suddenly worthy of acknowledgement. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was a transaction. An inquiry made not out of remorse, but curiosity, like a buyer circling back after a product finally earns a 5-star review. The days that followed were disorienting, not because of the press or the money or the sudden onslaught of people who now wanted to take meetings with me, but because I was walking around in a body that still remembered being invisible, still carried the weight of that quiet humiliation I'd known since childhood, the sideways glances at holidays, the "when are you going to get serious?" questions at dinner, the way my parents spoke of me as if I were a neighbor's kid rather than their own. And no amount of success changes that muscle memory. You can be in every newspaper, on every investor panel, shaking hands with CEOs who once dismissed your pitch as too idealistic, and still, deep inside, you're just that girl standing in your childhood kitchen being told to stop chasing dreams and start being practical. I didn't return the call. I told myself it was because I was too busy, too focused, too drained to engage in the emotional labor of a conversation I knew would leave me angrier than before. But the truth was, I wanted something more. I wanted them to see me, yes, but on my terms. Not through a screen. Not through whispered gossip from second cousins who now suddenly remembered I existed. I wanted them to see what they missed, to feel what it meant to underestimate someone, to erase them, and then realize, too late, that the thing you ignored has grown teeth. So, when Maya forwarded me the invite to the annual gala for the Northeast Community Grant Foundation, a black tie event my parents never missed and always bragged about attending, complete with red carpet photos and smiling shots in the town magazine, I didn't hesitate. This was the same event my father once described as where the serious players in our community show their faces, the same gala where he'd been on the fundraising committee for years, carefully positioning himself next to local judges, politicians, and anyone with a recognizable last name. They treated it like their personal stage, a place to perform decency and influence, to be seen in all the right ways. And now, through a few strings I was more than capable of pulling, I had a chance to walk directly into that carefully curated image and twist it, not with confrontation or chaos, but with something far more disarming: elegance. I didn't buy a ticket. I bought a table. One of the top sponsor-level ones, complete with a custom nameplate and a seat placement 2 rows ahead of the main donors, right in the center of the room. I didn't list my name publicly, just the name of the foundation I quietly started last year under our parent company, a nonprofit focused on microloans for women-led businesses in underbanked communities. It was still young, still modest, but it had teeth and momentum, and more importantly, it had money to move. Enough to get me on the radar of the organizers, enough to get me invited as a featured guest with a short spotlight speech. Just enough to make sure my presence couldn't be ignored. The night of the gala, I walked into that room not as the overlooked daughter or the forgotten founder, but as someone whose seat had already been earned, carved out by long hours, sleepless nights, and a kind of pain no one in that room would ever recognize unless they'd lived it. I wore a black floor-length gown that hugged my body like armor, heels that clicked like punctuation on marble floors, and a calm smile that hid the storm beneath. My table mates were local founders, educators, and a city councilwoman who'd recently read my op-ed in a business journal and asked if she could join me. I nodded, smiled, made small talk, and waited. Because I knew they were there. Of course they were. I spotted them during the second course, my father at a table near the center, his hand resting on the back of my mother's chair, both of them dressed to perfection, smiling that fixed smile they wore for events like this. They hadn't seen me yet, and part of me wanted to get up, walk straight over, and say something caustic, something biting, something that would burn into their minds long after the final toast. But instead, I waited. Because sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to people like that is make them notice you on your own terms. When the MC called my name to the stage, a special thank you to one of our new major sponsors, the founder and financial architect behind the Urban Spark initiative, there was a pause, a confused murmur, and then the slow, stunned realization from their table as I stood up and began walking to the podium. I didn't look at them. Not right away. I looked straight ahead, lifted the mic, and gave a brief, practice speech about community, belief, and the importance of investing in people before they're ready for the spotlight. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. I thanked the people who'd taken a chance on me, the mentors who believed when no one else would, and then I walked back to my table with grace and applause echoing behind me. Only then did I let my eyes find them, and there it was. My father, staring like he was trying to solve an equation he couldn't quite balance. My mother, blinking fast, hands tight in her lap, her posture just slightly off-kilter, as though the axis of her world had shifted, and she wasn't sure how to sit inside it anymore. They didn't come over. They didn't wave. But someone did slip something under my chair during the final speech, a folded piece of cream stationery, tucked just far enough back that I almost missed it. I waited until I was alone in the car to read it. No name, no signature. Just a few words written in my father's unmistakable slanted script. We didn't know how to love you. We're sorry. And even then, I didn't cry. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel victorious. I felt what I always felt when it came to them, tired. Because apologies delivered in whispers, in secret notes slipped under chairs, don't undo years of absence. They don't erase the nights spent wondering why your own parents treat you like an inconvenience. They don't heal. But they do leave a mark. And sometimes that's all you need. There is a point, and I think it arrives slowly, so slowly you barely notice the change, when the desire to be understood stops feeling urgent, when you realize that the apology you've been craving for years won't ever come in the form you imagined. And when it does appear, half-written on creased paper or offered in the hesitant tone of someone trying not to look directly at what they broke, it doesn't land like healing. It lands like a question you no longer feel obligated to answer. That's what I felt sitting in the backseat of the town car after the gala, that thin piece of stationery clutched between my fingers like a verdict handed down too late to matter. It should have been a moment of closure, a ribbon tied around a box I'd been carrying since I was old enough to understand what disappointment looked like when it wore your father's face and sounded like your mother's silence. But it wasn't closure. It wasn't relief. It was recognition, a belated, shaky, incomplete form of it, and though it was something, it was not enough to move the needle. The next morning, my phone rang again. Same name. Same soft vibration against the kitchen counter as I poured my coffee and stared through the glass windows at the empty terrace that came with the new apartment I hadn't yet made feel like home. Dad, the screen said, and I let it ring until it stopped, until the call turned to voicemail, until the silence returned like an old friend I'd finally gotten used to living with. I waited another hour before listening, not because I wanted to be dramatic, but because I needed time to steel myself for whatever version of vulnerability he was about to offer. When I finally hit play, his voice filled the room with an odd shakiness I wasn't prepared for, slower than usual, deliberate, careful, as though each word had to be peeled from the surface of something heavier than regret. He said he'd seen the article. That everyone had seen it. That even Uncle Don, who never reads tech stuff, had called to say, "Looks like your daughter made a name for herself." He said he didn't know how to explain what it felt like to realize you'd spent years being wrong about your own child, about the path she chose, about the strength she carried. He said he remembered my first science fair, how I built a model of a wind-powered irrigation system out of broken fans and spare tubing, and how even then, he hadn't known what to say. He said he was sorry. Not just for the note or the reunion or the things he never said, but for all the times he should have shown up and didn't, for not understanding how to love a child who didn't follow the script. It was, by every standard, the most honest thing he had ever said to me. And still, it made me feel nothing but exhausted. Because it came not when I needed it, not when I was on the floor of my tiny apartment trying to figure out how to pay for legal services with a negative bank account. Not when I was crying over rejection emails or eating dinner alone on Thanksgiving while Jeff posted photos of his 4-course family feast. Not when I needed a vote of confidence before walking into my first pitch meeting, but now. After the articles. After the IPO. After the world decided I was worth something. It was not remorse, it was reckoning. I didn't call him back. I wanted to. I almost did. I stared at his name on the call log, my thumb hovering just above the screen like a seesaw balance between history and hope, but I couldn't bring myself to open the door he had bolted shut for so many years. I told myself that maybe next week, maybe after I'd had time to process, maybe if I could find a way to say what I needed without unraveling, without shaking, without sounding like the teenager in me who still lived in the echo of, just don't embarrass us, I'd reach out. But that call never came. I drafted texts, deleted them. Rehearsed voicemails, never left them. I even wrote a letter once, long and careful, and then folded it into a drawer where it remains, untouched, unread, probably forever. And it wasn't because I hate them. It wasn't because I wanted revenge, though for a long time I thought I did. I used to fantasize about this exact moment, the moment they'd regret everything, when they'd call and I'd say, too late, with perfect poise, when I'd watch their faces fall in real time as they realized they'd bet against the wrong daughter. But when it finally happened, it didn't feel victorious. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff you'd spent your whole life climbing, only to discover the view isn't much different from the ground. In the weeks that followed, the gala photos went public. My parents never commented. Neither did I. The family group chat remained silent. Jeff sent a vague message about being happy for me and how we should catch up sometime, which I read twice and left unanswered. My mom sent a photo of their new golden retriever puppy, no caption. I didn't reply. I wasn't angry anymore. Not exactly. I was something quieter, something harder to define. Not quite indifferent, not quite forgiving, just done. People always say that success is the best revenge, but they never tell you how lonely it feels when there's no one left to prove wrong. When you look around and realize that the people whose approval you used to chase like oxygen no longer matter, not because they changed, but because you did. Somewhere along the way, I stopped needing them. Not because I stopped loving them entirely, but because I finally understood that love, at least in our family, had always been conditional, wrapped in expectations and performance and the unspoken rule that only the useful parts of you deserved attention. I still think about calling. Sometimes in the quiet hours before bed, when the world slows down just enough for the echoes to return, I wonder what he would say now if I picked up. I wonder if he thinks about that voicemail, if he regrets how long it took, if he wonders whether the daughter he dismissed ever forgave him for it. I wonder if my silence hurts him the way his once hurt me. But then I remember the note. We didn't know how to love you. And maybe that was the only honest thing they've ever said. Maybe love wasn't something they withheld out of cruelty, but something they simply never learned how to give. And maybe my mistake was believing it was my job to teach them. Maybe that's the real tragedy, not the distance between us, not the years we lost, but the years I spent trying to buy their approval with effort, ambition, and sacrifice. The night before our first board meeting post-IPO, I stood alone in my apartment, lights off, windows open to the city noise, and stared at a photo of my parents from 10 years ago, me between them, smiling stiffly at graduation. Their expressions unreadable. I stared at it until I could no longer remember what I felt that day, until all that remained was a quiet ache and the slow realization that some relationships can't be repaired, only survived. I picked up my phone. I opened the contact. I typed a message. Just one sentence. Then I stared at it. For a long time. And when the screen dimmed, I didn't wake it back up. I let it fade, like so many conversations that never happened. Because sometimes, forgiveness is a bad investment. And letting go is the only thing that pays off.